Hey guys, Gojo4 with you once again. Hope you guys are doing well. So, finally making this video, my review of Shin Godzilla or Shin Godzilla or Godzilla Resurgence. I got a chance to see the film one more time thanks to Funimation extending the release. So I got to see it today. I don't know, some other theaters may be showing it even next week, but today was the last day I could see it in my town. So I had to see it again so I could really get a closer look, get more story details, kind of get a better, more critical opinion. Well, Shin Godzilla is a different kind of Godzilla film. The directors wanted to kind of relate this more to the tsunami event from 2011, the tsunami and earthquake event. And a lot of the film is inspired by that. A lot of the film is inspired by how it affected people, how the government responded to people, or how the government responded to the disaster. Or how people felt like the government responded to the disaster, and just the general feeling that existed at the time. But anyway, let's get to the actual plot. Shin Godzilla is the story of the Japanese government responding to Godzilla showing up. It starts out with an eruption in Tokyo Bay near the Aquiline Bridge, and then the bridge itself becomes flooded with weird red goop. And then Yaguchi, he's probably the only character I remember his name, because I say his name a bunch of times. But he works in the Prime Minister's office. He's like, I think he starts as disaster relief. There's so many political titles, by the way, that I'm gonna forget what everybody's titles is. So I'm gonna miss a lot of details. But you know, it is what it is. Look it up for yourself if you really want to know specifically who was who. But anyway, he's called in to see what's going on, and he immediately, from some footage, he figures out that this thing is a creature. But the other guy's like, oh, it's a volcano, it's some chemical thing. Well, it turns out to be right. It is a creature, and it starts making its way through the city. It like goes through the riverways and pushing boats out, and it makes a huge fucking mess. And then it finally comes on land as Godzilla in his first form. Godzilla has multiple forms in this film, and that's the big controversy that everybody's freaking out over. But anyway, his first form starts going through the city and causing damage, and immediately the bureaucracy running the government is totally unable to deal with this. And by the end of Godzilla's first attack, where he goes into his second form, he ends up going back, it ends up going back in the ocean, and the government basically did nothing. And Yaguchi remarks, 2 hours this thing was on land, and they did nothing to stop it. So that's kind of this opening, this whole part, helps really establish how the rest of the film is going to be. It's Yaguchi kind of competing with the rest of the political establishment to try and stop this thing. Then he gets, after this, his own little team of these weirdo dork specialists and experts that nobody else likes, but they're kind of like The Office, if you will. And they're a volunteer group, and they start figuring out how the hell they're going to stop Shin Godzilla. But they're going to save the day, right? Anyway, and shit just gets worse from then. The Americans get involved, and that brings in Satomi Ishihara, the Japanese chick, Miss Patterson. That's her last name. I don't forget her first name. But they complicate things because the Americans knew about Godzilla, and then there was like a scientist who knew about Godzilla as well, and he was working with the Department of Energy, and he discovered that the Department of Energy had been dumping nuclear waste in the ocean, and Godzilla was eating that and mutated him. And he's this crazy, ever-evolving, mutating creature that's super adaptable. And again, now it makes it even more complicated. How are they going to stop this thing? For me, I guess the thing I can closely relate this film to is if they made Shin Godzilla, but instead of Tokyo, Shin Godzilla attacked New Orleans, and kind of related it to like the Katrina disaster, and how the government was very criticized for their response, and FEMA and all that, and George Bush was given a lot of criticism for his response to the Katrina disaster. This is kind of a similar thing, how the government is so inept. And so it's a very political film in many ways. It has a little bit of international diplomacy as well. Japan is trying to kill this thing, but America kind of keeps interfering because they have their own personal agenda going on. So it's not exactly like uh, safe, if you will. Like some Godzilla movies maybe don't, either they ignore it. Some Godzilla movies kind of ignore political kind of things, or they kind of tread over it. I feel like this one just goes for the throat. Acting is quite good. Like I said, I like the Yaguchi character. I like all the other characters. There's another character that Yaguchi is always competing with, um, and I like him quite a bit. In fact, I'm gonna look up the character's name. So the character's name, I believe, is Hideki. Anyway, he and Yaguchi are kind of rivals slash friends. Hideki works personally with the Prime Minister, and he's always kind of telling Yaguchi, hey, don't stir the boat, you know, play well. This is politics, right? Don't keep telling people what to do. You know, this is how it works. He's more the political player. He knows how the game works. You know, if you've ever seen, oh, what is that show with Kevin Spacey on Netflix? House of Cards? He's kind of like that. He's the middleman. He's sleazy-ish. He's not like a bad guy, but he knows how to work the politicians, because he knows how it works, and he doesn't rock the boat, and tries to get things done. He's very pragmatic, which is why I liked him, because he wasn't like, he was trying to do what was best for Japan, but also trying to work within what they realistically could. Whereas like Yaguchi is more heroic and maybe even dramatic, and he doesn't care for pleasing the politicians. The acting was really great, I think, with Hideki and Yaguchi. I really enjoyed the dynamic. I enjoyed how different they both were. You know, they both were trying to help Japan, but they had different ways of doing it. So for those two characters, I really liked them. For Satomi Ishihara's character, a big part of it is she's supposed to be an American, right? And everybody's already talked about this in this controversy, but she's supposed to be American. The issue is she speaks some English lines, and look, it's not her fault, but she definitely has a heavy accent, and she's just trying to pretend to be American, and it's very evident that she's not. Which, her Japanese dialogue and the way she acts is great, and so I don't know why they decided to make her an American. If they could have just made her like an attaché to an American embassy, like she could be working for the American embassy or something, like to the ambassador. This is a big cast. There's a lot of people. Besides like those three people, everybody else just shows up at random moments. So there's a lot of people in this movie. The action though is great. When Godzilla and the form show up, it's really cool to see. There's some great effects work, unlike we've ever seen in a Toho film. And the action is pretty intense. The level of destruction, while not like hugely widespread, I think there's been Godzilla movies where there's been more destruction overall, but like the detail you see and just the destruction feels immense. It feels like horrific, and Godzilla feels like a threat, which is something I kind of didn't get from Godzilla 2014, which I guess maybe they didn't try to do that, but Godzilla is like a threat in this film. He does feel like a menace that's like unstoppable. Like the original film, like the original 1954 film. So, for the moments that Godzilla does show up, it's really great to see him in action, or it in action. My more negative parts about the film had to be it was a little weird at times. It's a Hideki Anno film. I'm slaughtering the pronunciation on these films, I know. On these names, I know, but he did the Neon Genesis Evangelion film. He does weird stuff. So this movie's a little weird at times. If you're not ready for that, it's kind of weird. Godzilla's forms are a little funky looking. Some of the acting and the shots and the style, it's like funny at times, but it's not. It's like, I like to think of it as like The Office meets Godzilla at times. It's like office nerds trying to stop Godzilla, and there's some weird comedy in it. And some of Godzilla's like abilities, I think, were a little bit over the top. It's almost a little bit of overkill. And like I know they tried to make Godzilla different, but it felt like it was a little too silly at times. And that's what I'm going to get into. The other issue I have in the film is some of the CGI. Bless them for trying. I really mean it. It is some great effects work. But there are moments where it does look pretty silly. And I think since they did so much of it, it's a double-edged sword. It's like some of the best effects we've ever seen in a Toho film, but some of it still looks really bad. And I know this is coming from the same company that gave us really cheesy suits, but there was something about the suits and the cheesy effects that it was because you knew it was cheesy, you were okay with it. But this film tries to look realistic. So the moment something seems a little silly, you really notice it. And so I thought some of the effects on the forms were a little weak. Some of the effects on Godzilla, even his beam at times, it felt kind of a little silly, especially because his beam is really, like I said, very different, very powerful. You really notice it when it looks not too good. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the effects are bad. I'm saying there's some moments that kind of threw me off because they just used so much CGI that you could kind of tell. But that's okay because the music is pretty good. The music is made by the same guy who did like the music from Neon Genesis and Attack on Titan movies. The music's really good, and then there's some throwback scores from Ifuku that threw in there, which is really cool to hear those old tracks again. I was like, what? These are the old songs. It sucks because they're stock footage. I would have preferred that they remade them or recomposed them, but they just threw them in. So it feels a little funky, like it's a song recorded 50 years ago, playing in a modern film. It's a little weird. But it works, you know? It's great to hear them again. So I did love all the throwbacks to the original film and the original films in terms of sound effects, music, roars. He has some of the original 54 and 60s roars in there. It's really cool. So, feels like a Godzilla film. Anyway, overall, I'd say it's a very well-made film. It's incredibly well-made, in fact. It's probably the best Godzilla film Toho's ever made in terms of, I'm talking quality, production quality, as in sound, visual effects, cinematography, like production quality, budget, just on that purpose, one of the best made. In terms of story, it's a pretty good story, pretty tight. Characters are well done, the acting's pretty good. In terms of that, story, acting, characters, it's pretty good, I want to say. Nothing I think will ever beat the original, but I think it's pretty well made. So I'd say in terms of the Godzilla films, it's definitely a star. Like in terms of quality, it's production quality, it's good. Story and characters are pretty good. Now, according to my personal book, I think this film will always have kind of a barrier for me because it's a standalone Godzilla film. And personally, I'm not a huge fan of the standalone Godzilla films. I'll say in terms of the standalone Godzilla films that they've made, and this includes Godzilla 1954, Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 85, and this film. I'm not counting G98 because that's not a Godzilla film. I'm sorry to say, Godzilla 98 is not a Godzilla film. Sorry. So of those three, I have to say I like Shin Godzilla more than G1985, Return of Godzilla. I'm sorry to say, I know there's some people that have a lot of nostalgia for that film. Maybe they saw it in theaters. But for me personally, I think Shin Godzilla is better than Return of Godzilla. If you compare the two standalone Godzilla films, I just think it does a lot of things that Return of Godzilla tried to do, but better. But in comparing those two, I want to say Shin Godzilla is the best standalone Godzilla film, or my favorite standalone Godzilla film, besides the first one. First one will probably always win that. But I guess if I had to give it a critical score, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10. Well made. I think it's a great first film for a new series, and I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. It made a butt ton of money, and I'm excited to see where they go with it. Anno will probably not be directing the sequel, though. He's busy with other projects. So we'll have to see who picks up the director chair next. But I'm excited with what I'm seeing. I'm excited with the quality Toho is bringing to Godzilla now. This is definitely a step up from Final Wars, so don't worry about that. Let me know what you guys think if you've seen the film in the comments below. Are you guys excited possibly for a sequel? You know, or did you guys absolutely hate this and thought that they should have never made this film? Let me know. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.